The emergency meeting began at 6 a.m. Behind closed doors, officials debated a decision that would send shockwaves through the tennis world. By sunrise over Hard Rock Stadium, the verdict was finalized. Alex Eala would be banned, not for doping, not for unsportsmanlike conduct, not for breaking any rule on the court. The 20-year-old Filipina sensation, whose presence had transformed the Miami Open into a global phenomenon, was facing suspension because of the jersey she wore. The same Nike jersey that shattered every merchandise record in tournament history. The same jersey that accounted for 57% of all tournament merchandise sales. The same jersey adorned with the sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines, which had become an overnight symbol of pride, unity, and national identity for millions of Filipinos around the world. Now, that symbol was at the center of a growing controversy. According to tournament insiders, WTA officials pointed to strict uniform regulations, rules rooted in decades-old battles over branding and sponsorships that once sparked fierce conflicts between sportswear giants Nike and Adidas. What began as a celebration of culture and heritage had suddenly become a question of compliance, authority, and control. As news of the decision spread through the tennis community, disbelief quickly turned into outrage. Fans who had packed stadiums to watch Eala compete were asking the same question. How could the sport's biggest rising star face punishment for wearing a jersey that had inspired millions and broken every commercial record in sight?
Eala from Philippines. Brazilian tennis fans were curious to see you playing here, and you just had a great performance tonight. Are there more exhibitions like this to come?
Sorry, what do you mean by exhibitions? Like the tournaments?
No.
What do you mean? Sorry.
No, are there more exhibitions like this, the performance like this here in Brazil?
Well, this is my first time in Brazil, and my first time in South America actually. So I'm so happy to see that, the crowd is so lively, and I didn't expect, so many people to come out and watch me play. I guess I was a bit lucky to be sandwiched in between two great Brazilians. So no, I'm just so happy to be here and to be able to.
The numbers were still climbing when the controversy erupted. Every hour brought another record. Every update revealed another milestone. And with each passing day, Alex Eala's influence grew larger than anyone had imagined. The moment her official tournament jersey was released, demand exploded. Nike's website struggled to keep up as thousands of fans rushed online simultaneously. Pre-orders vanished within hours. Inventory disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. From Manila to Dubai, from Sydney to Los Angeles, supporters scrambled to secure what many were already calling a historic piece of tennis memorabilia. By the end of the tournament, the figures were staggering. Alex Eala's jersey had become the best-selling item of the entire event. No other player came close. Some of the sport's most established stars generated impressive merchandise numbers, but the wave surrounding Eala was on another level. Her jersey became the symbol of a movement that stretched far beyond tennis courts and stadium walls. And merchandise was only the beginning. The moment ticket sales opened, demand surged beyond expectations. Fans flooded booking platforms, eager for a chance to watch the young Filipina sensation in person. Every session featuring Eala became one of the hottest tickets of the tournament, creating an atmosphere unlike anything organizers had anticipated. At the center of it all was a jersey that represented far more than athletic apparel. Its elegant design paid tribute to Filipino heritage. Delicate sampaguita-inspired details flowed across the collar and sleeves. National colors were woven into the trim. Every element carried meaning. Every detail told a story. For millions of Filipinos around the world, it wasn't simply a uniform. It was a statement, a celebration of identity, a symbol of national pride. Fans wore it everywhere, not just inside stadiums but in schools, offices, shopping centers, restaurants, and community gatherings. Wherever Filipinos came together, the jersey appeared as a badge of support for a young athlete who had become a source of inspiration for an entire nation. For Nike, the success was extraordinary. Years earlier, the company had recognized something special in Alex Eala. She wasn't treated as just another sponsored athlete. She became part of a larger vision. From custom-designed accessories inspired by Filipino culture to exclusive promotional campaigns, Nike invested in building a brand that reflected both her talent and her heritage. Now that vision was paying off in spectacular fashion. But while Nike celebrated a marketing triumph, Others were looking at the jersey through a very different lens. Behind closed doors, questions were being raised. Questions about regulations. Questions about branding limits. Questions about whether the design complied with existing uniform standards. To supporters, the jersey represented culture, pride, and inspiration. To critics, it represented a potential violation. And as the debate intensified, one reality became impossible to ignore. The same jersey that had made history was now at the center of a controversy that threatened to overshadow everything Alex Eala had achieved on the court. The controversy surrounding tennis uniforms did not begin with Alex Eala. In reality, it had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. The rules were originally introduced with a simple goal: maintain fairness, protect sponsor agreements, and preserve a consistent professional image across the sport. Officials argued that no single company should dominate the visual identity of tennis, no matter how powerful its brand became. But almost from the moment those regulations were created, controversy followed. Critics claimed that the rules were rarely as clear, or as equal, as they appeared on paper. The first major battle erupted during the 1990s. What became known as the Patch Wars exposed deep divisions between players, sponsors, and governing bodies. Disputes over logos, branding rights, and sponsorship visibility transformed what should have been simple uniform guidelines into a political battlefield stretching across the sport. Behind every logo was money, behind every sponsorship patch was influence, and behind every rule was a fight for control. As the years passed, the conflict only grew more complicated. Major sportswear giants found themselves locked in an ongoing struggle over a surprisingly difficult question: where does fashion end and advertising begin? One company would argue that certain design features were part of the garment itself. Another would insist those same features functioned as branding. Officials were repeatedly forced to decide whether they were looking at artistic expression or commercial promotion. The debate expanded far beyond tennis. Courtrooms became involved. International sporting organizations became involved. Executives, lawyers, athletes, and sponsors all entered the conversation. Yet despite years of arguments, no universal answer ever truly emerged. Instead, the sport continued operating within a system many considered subjective, a framework where interpretation often mattered as much as the written rules themselves. And that uncertainty created tension, because every player understood the same reality. What was approved at one tournament could suddenly become controversial at another. What was accepted one year could be questioned the next. The boundaries never seemed completely fixed. As Alex Eala's popularity exploded across the globe, that long-running conflict returned to the spotlight. Only this time the stakes were higher than ever. Her rise had become one of the biggest stories in tennis. Her image was everywhere. Her merchandise was generating unprecedented attention. And the jersey at the center of the phenomenon was attracting scrutiny from every direction. Questions began circulating behind the scenes. Were the design elements fully compliant? Did the branding exceed acceptable limits? Had cultural expression crossed into prohibited territory? Or was the rulebook itself struggling to keep pace with a new generation of athletes whose influence extended far beyond the court? For players, sponsors, and fans, the uncertainty was frustrating. The standards often appeared fluid, the interpretation seemed inconsistent, and the consequences could be significant. Which is why, when Alex Eala's jersey became the center of intense debate, many observers saw more than a simple uniform dispute. They saw the latest chapter in a decades-long battle over identity, branding, power, and who ultimately gets to decide how the sport presents itself to the world. What began as a question about a jersey was rapidly becoming a question about the future of tennis itself. And then came the numbers. The numbers that critics claimed could no longer be ignored. Everywhere Alex Eala played, the atmosphere changed. Crowds arrived earlier. Lines grew longer. Energy filled the stadium. Fans traveled thousands of miles for the chance to witness a player many believed was becoming the face of a new generation. But when her tournament run ended, the contrast was impossible to miss. Seats that had been filled with excitement suddenly sat empty. The buzz surrounding the event faded. The momentum slowed. For tournament organizers already facing pressure, the difference raised uncomfortable questions about just how much of the event's popularity had become tied to one player. Off the court, the impact appeared even greater. Merchandise demand surrounding Eala continued to surge. Her jersey had evolved far beyond a piece of sportswear. It had become a symbol embraced by supporters across the world. Filipino communities rallied around it. Families wore it proudly. Fans displayed it as a statement of identity, culture, and national pride. What began as a tennis uniform had transformed into a movement. And now, according to reports circulating throughout the tennis world, that very jersey was at the center of a controversy threatening to overshadow everything. The reaction was immediate. Social media exploded. Supporters voiced outrage. Online campaigns gained momentum within hours. Across multiple countries, fans demanded answers and questioned why one of the sport's fastest rising stars had become the focus of such intense scrutiny. The backlash continued to grow. What had started as a discussion about uniform regulations was rapidly evolving into a public relations crisis. And perhaps that was the greatest irony of all. For years, professional tennis had searched for ways to reach new audiences. The sport wanted bigger crowds, more engagement, greater international visibility, a new generation of passionate supporters. Then Eala arrived. She brought energy. She brought attention. She brought an audience that many believed tennis had struggled to reach for years. Yet instead of celebrating the phenomenon, the sport now found itself consumed by a controversy surrounding the very player who had generated so much excitement. To her supporters, it felt unfair. To critics, it raised serious questions about how rules should be applied. And to tournament officials, the situation was becoming increasingly difficult to control. Because the debate was no longer just about a jersey. It was no longer just about regulations. It was about perception. It was about identity. And it was about whether the sport was prepared to embrace a new kind of global superstar. Meanwhile, away from the cameras and beyond the headlines, tension was reportedly building inside the locker room. Players were talking. Questions were being asked. And the divisions that had once existed quietly behind the scenes were beginning to surface in public. The storm surrounding Eala was only getting started. What happened next surprised almost everyone. The divisions that had defined the conversation for weeks suddenly began to disappear. Players who had once questioned the spotlight surrounding Eala were now standing beside her. Old disagreements no longer seemed important. Personal rivalries were pushed aside. A growing number of players felt that the controversy had become about something much larger than a single jersey or a single athlete. It had become a question of fairness. And that changed everything. Voices that had rarely agreed on anything suddenly found common ground. Some of Eala's biggest competitors publicly expressed concern over the situation. Others reportedly voiced their support behind closed doors. The details differed, but the message remained remarkably consistent. The focus should be on the game, not on creating controversy around one of its fastest rising stars. The shift was impossible to ignore. For years, women's tennis had often been defined by fierce competition and intense rivalries. But now, many players appeared united by a shared belief that the situation was spiraling beyond what anyone had expected. The discussion was no longer about rankings. It was no longer about tournament draws. It was no longer about who won or lost. Instead, the conversation centered on a larger question. How should the sport treat the very athletes helping it reach new audiences around the world? As support continued to grow, pressure on officials intensified. Every statement generated headlines. Every reaction fueled debate. Every new voice added momentum to a controversy that seemed to expand by the hour. Then came another development few had anticipated. Former champions, respected veterans, and influential figures connected to the sport began weighing in as well. Some called for clarity. Others called for consistency. Many simply urged tennis authorities to find a solution that would avoid further division. Their involvement elevated the story from a routine dispute into a conversation that touched every corner of the tennis world. Suddenly, this was no longer a disagreement taking place behind closed doors. It had become a global discussion, a debate about rules, a debate about culture, a debate about how sports organizations should adapt in an era where athletes can inspire millions far beyond the boundaries of competition. And while reactions continued to spread throughout the tennis community, nowhere was the response more passionate than among Eala's supporters. Across social media, fan groups mobilized, communities organized, Messages of support flooded every platform. For many, this was no longer simply about tennis. It was about representation. It was about pride. It was about seeing someone from their community reach the highest levels of the sport and refusing to stay silent when that achievement appeared to be under threat. The controversy had already grown larger than anyone expected. Now it was becoming something else entirely, a movement. For Alex Eala's supporters, the controversy felt deeply personal. They had followed her journey from the beginning, from junior tournaments played far from the spotlight, to international competitions where few outside the tennis world knew her name, to packed stadiums and global headlines that transformed her into one of the most talked about young athletes on the planet. They had celebrated every victory. They had endured every setback. And now many felt compelled to defend her once again. Across social media, support spread at remarkable speed. Messages poured in from every corner of the world. Fans shared photos, videos, memories, and stories of how Eala's rise had inspired them. What began as a debate over a tennis uniform was rapidly evolving into something much larger. A conversation about representation. A conversation about culture. A conversation about belonging. In the Philippines, emotions ran especially high. Supporters gathered at tennis facilities, sports clubs, and public viewing areas where her matches had once united thousands of fans. Many wore jerseys inspired by her journey. Others carried flags and banners. Some simply came to show support for an athlete they believed had become a symbol of national pride. The same scenes were echoed far beyond Philippine shores. In cities across North America, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, Filipino communities rallied around the player who had captured the world's attention. The movement seemed to grow with every passing day. And as public attention intensified, questions began emerging about the broader consequences of the controversy. Industry observers debated how sponsors might react. Analysts discussed the potential impact on fan engagement. Commentators questioned whether the situation could affect the sport's momentum in emerging markets where interest had recently surged. What had once appeared to be a simple regulatory dispute was now attracting attention from far beyond the tennis community. The stakes were growing larger. The headlines were growing louder. And the pressure was increasing on all sides. Many believed officials had underestimated the emotional connection between Alex Eala and her supporters. They assumed the controversy would eventually fade. Instead, it continued gaining momentum. Because for countless fans, their loyalty was not tied solely to tournaments or rankings. It was tied to a story of perseverance, a story of representation, a story of a young athlete who had inspired people to believe that someone from their community could compete on the biggest stages in the world. And while debates raged across television panels, social media platforms, and sports networks, one person remained noticeably absent from the conversation: Alex Eala herself. As speculation intensified and emotions reached a boiling point, she chose not to respond publicly. No dramatic interviews,